Labour MP and former deputy to the party, Harriet Harman, who's chair of the Joint Committee on Human Rights. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
There's been a lot of concern about this bill for quite some time, and we've seen some really quite angry demonstrations and indeed some quite violent demonstrations over this. Now, no one here is going to be defending the right to violent protest in a democracy. It's always unacceptable, but most people would regard the right to protest as one of the very fundamental human rights. We cheer that on in Hong Kong, in Myanmar, and places like that. What is it in particular that concerns you about the what's in this bill?
Well, I think you're right to set aside the issue of violence. And if there is violence, obviously the police already have powers that they need now to deal with it. And indeed, the police didn't ask for these new powers. And I just think it's a bit baffling about where the government are coming from on this. Because as you say, when we look in other countries, in other parts of the world, and we see anybody who wants to speak up and make their voice heard, clamped down on, we don't like that. It gives us an uneasy feeling. It's not what our democracy is about. And obviously MPs can speak up and you as in the media can speak up. But what about people who just want to protest about something and make their voice heard? And to put restrictions on noise, I mean, the sound of a noisy demonstration is literally the sound of democracy. And what we think is instead of increasing penalties and increasing the restrictions on demonstrations and protests, what the government should actually be doing is putting in this new bill that the right to demonstrate is important and should be protected.
I mean, a lot of people will be concerned. I mean, certainly after Extinction Rebellion and frankly, it was just tedious, the effect that had. I'm really object to the fact that when they go around pouring paint over things and locking themselves onto trains and disrupting other people's lives. But, closing down bridges, major arterial routes in the capital and in other cities as well. A lot of people would say, look, you can have your demo, but could you do it, in Hyde Park rather than doing it on a major bridge across the Thames River? And a lot of people say you've got a right to protest, but you haven't got a right to go about basically impinging on other people's legal right to go about their business. There's a difficult balance there.
Well, there is a balance to be struck. The police already have the powers. If obstructing the highway is a criminal offence, pouring paint is criminal damage, and that's a criminal offence. And what we need to do is have a reasonable balance where people are allowed to create a certain amount of disruption in order to be noisy, in order to have their voice heard. I mean, I was delayed going into the House of Commons yesterday afternoon because there was a protest there. But we're that sort of country that if people want to come to Westminster, to their parliament and shout their concerns, we need to hear them. The alternative, which the government is putting forward, is more restrictions and more penalties and more police powers, which the police didn't even want. So what we're saying is they should drop these clauses from the bill and instead put in the police bill that there is a right to demonstrate in this country. And this is a cross-party report from House of Commons and House of Lords. I mean, there are other things for them the government should be worrying about. And this is just going in the wrong direction.
I mean, indeed, that protest she had to walk through was an anti-lockdown protest. There'll be another one across London on Saturday. I must ask you about another issue, though, before I let you go. You've been a big campaigner for women's rights over the years. There are a number of stories about trans women in the news and implications for women and their safety and fairness, equality. A trans athlete being selected for weightlifting for the Olympic Games. A Royal Academy artist being basically ousted from the items being sold in the gift shop simply because she has said that men can't become women, that trans women are not women, with no disrespect whatsoever to trans women. St Paul's, one of the top schools in the country, didn't you go or your daughter go to St Paul's? Now saying that they're going to have a head girl that's not a head girl, but just removing the word girl. Are you concerned about the erasure of women from public life, the erasure of women as an identity and as an existence that is not necessarily just something in a figment of men's imagination, but is actually, we are something that exists completely exclusive of whether a man thinks we do or not? Are you concerned about this?
I am concerned about inequality. I'm concerned about discrimination. I'm concerned about misogyny as well. So whether it's unequal pay or domestic violence or the lack of women's representation, I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about transphobia, people beating up trans people on the streets. And I think that it's important to recognise that whatever the basis of inequality is, whether it's racism, whether it's ageism, whether it's sexism, prejudice, discrimination, and oppression is a bad thing, and that we should be championing the cause of exposing that and challenging it wherever it is.
Well, who would disagree with that? I mean, everyone will be nodding along to that. But the point is, when two sets of rights collide, then we have to choose. So the right of women not to compete against biological men in sport. Where do women's rights come in there in terms of equality? The right of women to voice their views, widely accepted views by 95% of the population, that a man cannot become a woman. People who are absolutely, totally welcoming anyone who wants to change their identity, change their clothing, a man who wants to live as a woman and change their name, absolutely very happy to be polite and respectful and welcoming, would absolutely defend them in the street if anyone was being abusive, never in any way denigrating that person in any way. But nevertheless, not feeling the need that I have to accept that person is now a woman in the same way that I'm a woman and you're a woman. I don't have to do that. That doesn't mean I'm full of hate and I'm transphobic. It just means that I understand basic biology. When we talk about that, where do you stand on those issues?
Well, in relation to the qualification for the Olympics, I think the issue has for a long time been there about the Olympic Committee deciding who can qualify to be in women's sport. And these have always been very difficult issues. But I think that we need to keep our eye on the ball of recognising that there is inequality between men and women, and we need to champion the rights of women not to be unequal to men. And we also need to recognise that to be a person who is transitioning from one gender to another comes with a lot of difficulties, and that we should support people who are doing that.
Yes.
And not actually see them as a threat.
No, not that. But at the end of the day, I don't want my daughter playing, say, rugby against a biological male. That's not safe for her, is it?
But that issue about how you decide whether somebody is male or female in sport is one which is a very difficult one for the sports authorities. It's not.
No, but it's not for most people.
It always has been.
If you are born with a penis, you're male, and if you're born with a vagina, you're female. It's quite simple, actually.
Well, it's not that simple, actually.
It really is that simple. You can change your identity. You can live your life as the opposite sex. You can have any treatment you want. But a man, if you are born a biological male and you've gone through puberty, you have the muscle mass and the testosterone levels previously of a man, you have an advantage over women. Simple as that.
Well, in many situations, it is not as simple as that. And I think that, we should be careful to ensure that everybody can have equality and not be discriminated against.
Including women.
And including women and including trans people. And whether it's gay rights or racial equality, I want us all to be championing those who are facing oppression, not actually arguing amongst ourselves.
Well, it's all very well, but a glorious sitting of on that fence, Harriet Harman. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to, at some point, you're going to have to come down on one side or the other in terms of the women athletes or the trans athletes, because I'm afraid you can't balance them both together. You really can't. Harriet Harman, I know we'll have to leave it there. Time is so against us. Labour Chair of the Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights.